Thank you, DCJ. Ms. Carolus, I'd like to begin at page 23 of your statement. Just to orientate ourselves in the chronology, at this stage of your statement, you've entered 2012, so you're in the final year of your term on the board of SAA, and you begin at paragraph 65 on that page to talk about a presentation that was made to the minister about the capitalization requirements for SAA. And you start to speak there about the need for a guarantee for SAA. Could you please tell the chair about why the guarantee was necessary and what the position, the financial position of SAA was at that beginning of 2012?
Thank you, Chairperson. I must say at that stage, for the 2 preceding years, SAA had actually posted a small profit. Not a big one, but it was very different from probably about 2 decades before then, when there was consistently being paid a bailout. And I think there's a difference. It's perhaps appropriate, Chairperson, to indicate the difference between a guarantee and a bailout. A bailout is to pay for the fact that you have losses that you have incurred because of bad things that you did or happened in the past. So it's after the fact, it's historic. A guarantee is in fact just a request from a shareholder to say that should unforeseen circumstances happen, that your shareholder backs you to a certain extent. The necessity for the guarantee at this stage was twofold. The one was, for both of those 2 instances I shall refer to, was to in fact enable the airline to give comfort so that SAA could go into the regular financial markets to go and borrow money. Up until then, people were quite shy to put up money for SAA because they all thought it was a black hole and that the chances of recovering the money would be quite unlikely. And so now we were in a much better place, and the financial institutions were beginning to look at us again. We wanted this specifically because of the recapitalization needs for the fleet, so that when we go and borrow money in the markets, we would be able to have that back up by the shareholder to say that should anything go wrong, we will back them. But it was also because at that stage, when the financial services institutions looked at the business plan that SAA had, they saw it was a bankable proposition. Otherwise, there would be no appetite, because sometimes banks accept the opportunity to offer you the financial instruments, and sometimes they don't, because they just think this is too high risk. So the fact that there was actually appetite for that, but because we had such a weak balance sheet at that stage, it was quite a difficult situation for SAA, and we discussed this with the minister. And when we made this presentation, we actually said there were a set of options for what we could do. And obviously the most desirable one is if our shareholder, like shareholders normally do, say we will guarantee that in the unlikely event of unforeseen circumstances, we will back you. So it's not like saying, I just think that's important, because people confuse it often when they look at state bailouts of state-owned entities versus guarantees. So the state is not required to put the money up front. It's just in case. And in that year, in 2012, we had a particularly bad year after these 2 years of small...
So the guarantee is about the future, the bailing out
also
is about...
It's about the future. That's correct, Chairperson.
What has happened already.
That's a very succinct way of putting it. Thank you, Chairperson. So the reason... So we were looking at being able to get overdraft facilities. Now, like any one of us, if you're in debt, if you're highly indebted, the bank will be much more punitive in the rate at which they give you an overdraft facility or a bond, anything that you're going to debt for. So similarly with SAA, if we had some injection and backup from the shareholder, the interest rate that they would charge for those loans that we would incur to purchase a new aircraft would be more favorable. The terms would be more favorable. But in 2012, the whole world was hit by a situation which even in today's terms, with the fuel price going up like that, today seems almost laughable. The fuel price went up to $122 a barrel in that year. And so for that year, SAA's expenditure went up by 2 billion rand. So there was absolutely nothing. It was completely outside of our control, just the fuel charges. And fuel is, in fact, one of your biggest expenses. And on top of it, SAA was flying very fuel-inefficient aircraft, which even Etihad and Air Kenya were not flying it. So the aircraft SAA was still sitting with was much heavier, the weight of them. So the fuel consumption, they had 4 engines. Sadly, many of them are still in the fleet because of the way Ms. Mieni went into that funny thing with BNP, which we can maybe come to later. But so we were then stuck with an extra 2 billion rand that we had nothing, everywhere in the world, everyone was. Plus, we were then had this ambition that was signed off with the new routes and the new mix of aircraft and the retirement of some aircraft that would enable us to borrow the money to buy the new fleet. Ordinarily, ordering new aircraft takes 4 years from when you order. So it had to be treated with some haste and speed. But at that stage, we were in a very good position on one basis, that it was just posted from the time post-2008 meltdown in the North and the Western economies. A lot of airlines had ordered aircraft that they were no longer able to in fact take up. So we could get fairly good deals, and in fact we did. We purchased, I think, 4 new aircraft, which was available simply because other people were even worse off than we were, airlines, so they weren't able to honor their commitments. And so for the manufacturers, it made good sense. If they could get rid of it, it would be a great thing. So we were able to negotiate fairly competitive and fairly good prices in that. But so when we actually put our case to the minister for the guarantee, that was the matter, so that we would, on the one hand, be able to manage if we ended up with a massive loss, we would be able to do that because of the fuel price. And on the other hand, that we would be able to give the banks the comfort to lend money for us for purchases of the new aircraft at a more favorable rate. And I recall, just anecdotally, Chairperson, in the meeting we had with the minister where we put these 3 options, he was more militant than we were, but no, we had to get the guarantee. Because we said to him, we've actually got 3 potential funders who are willing for the first time in a long time to fund SAA, but obviously the interest rate. So he was quite a strong proponent, and he was convinced us that he would do what it takes to do that. Then with the question of where we were going to end with this fuel price, we said as early as February that we anticipate that we're going to be in a very tough situation because of the fuel price increase, and which was all the more reason why the guarantee letter needed to be expedited. So I must say that notwithstanding that, Chairperson, we still that year, notwithstanding 2 billion rand extra costs that was unbudgeted for, we still managed to come out with a small net profit. We had a 700 million rand operational loss, but we had a small net profit. And we think that's quite remarkable, with 2 billion, to be able to clear 1.3 billion of that, just through smart management of your finances, of your fleet and your business planning. And the adaptation there was quite an achievement. So, Chairperson, that was basically, I don't know if I've answered fully the question around the guarantee, ma'am.
Indeed, thank you, Ms. Carolus. The one aspect I just wanted to get your comment on is at the bottom of paragraph 65 at page 23. You draw the link between the necessity of the guarantee and the nature of the audit that SAA would have received. Could you please explain to the Chair why the guarantee was necessary in order to have an unqualified audit position for SAA?
Thank you, Chairperson. The question of the guarantee was about the board being able to express a view and demonstrate that it was a going concern, that it was not bankrupt. And so that's, in very crude terms, the concept of the going concern. And in terms of the Companies Act, you have to demonstrate that you are a going concern and that you're not trading recklessly. I must emphasize, Chairperson, because this is also a matter that gets conflated and that I think Minister Gigaba bandied around, a piece of, I think, wrong information, was that a going concern status is a very different matter from your audited financial statements. Your going concern matters is going into the future. You are able to trade responsibly and so on. At that stage, for 2012, as indeed the years before, South African Airways' books were audited without any evidence of wrongdoing. I really want to emphasize that point.
That is during your term?
During our term, yes, during our term.
Throughout
and absolutely,
the term?
Yes, sir. And absolutely, even in 2012, our books were audited and submitted on time at the end of our financial year, which is the 30th of March. It was submitted within the lawful required period. We had submitted that. And the auditors found that we had met all the governance requirements and there was no evidence of wrongdoing. So, because later on it might become more relevant, Chairperson, when upon our resignation, the Minister was publicly going around and in fact wrote to Parliament to say that our financials were not finalized, which was not true. There's a big difference between the financials not being finalized and you not being a going concern. As I said, Chairperson, we started to raise this matter since February. Our financial year ends in March. The Minister assures us he wants us to go for the guarantee option. It will be the cheapest for the airline and it makes absolute sense. We get more and more worried as time goes by that we're not having the AGM because the audited financial statements is presented to the DPE, submitted there in terms of the PFMA, but in terms of the Companies Act, we also have to report at our annual general meeting. So we say to the Minister, let's go to the AGM, even if we have a qualified audit, because if you can't prove your going concern status, which we couldn't without the guarantee letter, the auditors would then say we are satisfied with the state of the books and the governance as a whole, and an account for how the money was spent. But going forward, it cannot be guaranteed that there isn't a risk of bankruptcy, so that you are not a going concern. So that would be the qualification that would happen if we didn't have the guarantee letter. But it would not impact on our ability, on the lawfulness, the legal standing of how we conduct our affairs. And so we said to the Minister that obviously the most desirable thing is to have the going concern and have an unqualified audit. But failing that, we think it's actually more desirable to remain within the prescripts of the law, to be able to present our financial statements in time with both the PFMA and the Companies Act, which they say, and I think Advocate Hoffman will bring our attention to some matter in relation to these dates. So we submitted our statements by the 31st of August to both the DPE and to Finance Department. So we were in full compliance. We start really raising concern as we go. In fact, the 31st of August, we just decided to submit it at the risk of not being a going concern. But that matter is only pronounced upon when you go to the AGM, because it's at the AGM that you have to, as a board, be able to give that assurance of a going concern.
Ms. Carolus, if I may, just on that point, just so that we can orientate ourselves in the legislative structure. Yeah. You're talking now, as I have your testimony, to the presentation of your audited financial statements to the DPE, which is a requirement under the PFMA, as you've referenced. And Chair, just to take you there in the bundle, the relevant section of the PFMA is section 55, and you'll find it at page 160. What you will see there is section 55 begins with the accounting authority for a public entity, and then if you go down to D, says it must submit within 5 years of the end of a financial year to the relevant treasury, to the executive authority responsible for that public entity, and if the Auditor General did not perform the audit of the financial statements, to the Auditor General, and then there's a list of 3, the annual report, the financial statements for that year after the statements have been audited, and the report from the auditors on those statements. So the PFMA's requirement under 55(1)D is a requirement that that be done in 5 months from the end of the financial year. And Ms. Carolus says, I have your testimony, that is the end of August, which is 5 months after the end of SAA's financial year. Is that correct?
That is correct, Chairperson.
So if we could then go to paragraph 68 on page 24 of your statement, because I understand from you that that is the second place where you'd like to make a correction to your statement.
Yes, ma'am.
In the first sentence there, you say, in terms of the PFMA, SAA was required to submit its financial statements to National Treasury within 6 months of the financial year end in March, i.e. by the end of September. What is the correction you'd like to make there?
Chairperson, the correction I wish to make is that it's in terms of the Companies Act, because these are the 2 pieces of legislation that govern us, is the PFMA and the Companies Act, and that's a mistake. I'm sorry, it should have read Companies Act.
So just to get the position clear, in terms of the PFMA, if you keep that sentence referring to the PFMA, then my suggestion on the basis of what you've said is all that you would change there is the reference to 6 months in the second sentence should be 5 months.
That is correct.
And we'll come later in the evidence to the Companies Act requirement.
That is correct, Chairperson.
Right.
Also, so 68, we can keep PFMA.
Indeed.
And that's then just change only the months. Is that correct?
That is correct, Chairperson.
Indeed. So the only change would be to remove the word 6 in the second sentence and replace it with 5. Is that correct, Ms.
That is
Carolus?
correct, Chairperson.
Okay,
And then I'd like to
thank
take you to another document. Thank you, Chair. Because your evidence was that you had managed to submit to the DPE and the relevant other bodies your financial statements by the end of August. And the confirmation of that you will find at page 156 of your bundle. That's Exhibit R. We can actually start a page earlier, which is 155. Just to orientate ourselves in the bundle, these are documents that were added to your original statement and annexures because they were documents that were obtained from National Treasury by the Commission's legal team after receipt of your statement. And what they show, Chair, is the interaction between the Minister Gigaba from Public Enterprises and Minister Gordhan as Minister of Finance in the course of the period where there is engagement between them about the need for the guarantee. So what you see beginning at page 155 is a letter from Minister Gigaba at the time to Minister Gordhan as Minister of Finance, updating the Minister of Finance on the position of SAA. And if you go over the page to page 156, you'll see that Minister Gigaba himself in this letter refers to that section of the PFMA, and he says on the face of it, in accordance with SAA's obligations under section 55(1)D of the PFMA and the company's commitment to compliance, I've agreed with its board of directors that SAA should proceed to submit its annual report and annual financial statements to the Auditor General, National Treasury, and the Director General of my department today. And that you'll see as a letter signed on the 31st of August 2012. Ms. Carolus, can you confirm that that is in fact what happened?
That is correct, Chairperson.
And I note that you were copied on that letter at the bottom.
That is correct. I didn't have a copy of my own because obviously I didn't retain any documents after I stepped down.
It's many years later, but it's common cause, at least insofar as Minister Gigaba is engaging with Minister Gordhan, that there was compliance with the PFMA requirements. You have already indicated in your evidence, and we'll come to it again, that despite that, there were utterances on public platforms that Minister Gigaba made about your non-compliance. Is that correct?
That is correct, Chairperson, and in fact, constant referral to the fact that SAA had not completed the audit of the financial statements.
Notwithstanding what appears at
notwithstanding
page...
what is clearly acknowledged by him.
Thank you. I'd then like to move to the efforts you took, because in your evidence you'd concluded with, before I interrupted you, and I do apologize for that, you were at the end of August. You were telling us that you'd submitted the audited financial statements, and now you were moving into the September phase. Can you please tell us about that phase, that month, in the experiences of the board in its engagements with Minister Gigaba? And if you refer to page 25, paragraph 70, you reference the efforts you took to prepare a handover report. You tell us about that. Why was a handover report important?
Chairperson, we were coming to the end of our term, and I think that it's good practice to do a handover report. But we had also, members of the board were becoming very concerned about some of the minister's utterances. The minister had spoken, and I think there may be I can't recall, I think there may be a copy of a press coverage where the minister spoke at the Cape Town Press Club. So all the prestigious newspapers, everybody was there. And the minister made quite sweeping statements about the fact that SAA, the board, had no strategy, it had no vision, and basically they were unpatriotic, and threw out all kinds of things about how some levels of remuneration or financial rewards in the system of SAA, it wasn't clear whether it was board and management, was in fact quite inappropriate. But specifically the fact that SAA has got no strategy, and that was a refrain he started to repeat more and more, which also is factually incorrect, Chairperson, because in your submission every year, along with your financials, you have to submit every year your business plan, your strategy and your business plan, and then your corporate plan. And your corporate plan is a shareholder compact where you then say, in terms of the strategy, this is what you as shareholder together with the entity agree will be your key deliverables. And that gets evaluated on a quarterly basis, where there's a chance for the entity to either say, let's say in our case, where one of our elements of the corporate plan stipulated certain financial expectations that the shareholder had and that we could commit to. And it enables us on a quarterly basis to raise concerns from both sides if things were not going well. So, but you had to have, legally you had to have a strategy, and I think it's outlined in that protocol. I think Minister Hogan may have shared that, where they outline exactly how you are told what to expect and you negotiate that and so on. So you sign off as the minister, as your accounting authority, and the company upfront on what the strategy is every year. You have quarterly meetings where you monitor to see if that is going to plan, and both parties can raise whatever they wish. And so we did think it was inappropriate and quite nasty of the minister to go around saying that, but he knew it was not true. You couldn't be operating as an entity without a strategy. I must say, Chairperson, that I had a much more tolerant view on the man. Not tolerant, I rolled my eyes. Some of the other board members felt that were much more angry about it, and in fact also concerned, because they felt these were all people of senior stature who serve in businesses, who own successful businesses, who sit on international bodies, including somebody like Russell Loebscher, who's the CEO of the stock exchange, who tells other companies how to run their business and sits in judgment there. So people felt that the minister was becoming quite malicious. And I just said to them, you know what, the minister's just being a politician. You just blame everybody except yourself for anything. And especially if you were under attack for one piece of work, you deflect to somebody else. So I honestly just at that stage still said that. I thought, but we did raise it with the minister. You know, why do you say this on the odd occasions that we had routine interactions? And then he would say, no, I've been quoted out of context. And that's when I, of course, confirmed for me the fact that, no, he's just being a politician, because that's what you also do. You say, no, I was quoted out of context, or I never said that, and when they prove it, then you say, I was quoted out of context. So we actually, as I said, the board was quite agitated. But then more and more, the minister became more and more strident about this, about our incompetence as a board, about our deviousness and our lack of patriotism, just fairly random comments that he made. And the thing that worried us particularly was this notion there was no strategy and there was no competence, because effectively he was consistently saying we didn't know what we were doing. And so we decided to pay particular attention to a fairly detailed handover report, where we documented the journey from where we arrived, with relevant attachments and so on, and the steps we took to bring the airline to a different place that was in compliance with the law and in compliance with the aspirations of the shareholder. And so that's why we decided to do that handover report, Chairperson.
And Ms. Carolus, you have attached that report to your statement. I don't propose to go into it in any detail, but just to reference that it commences at page 92, it runs to page 139. So it is, I think, could fairly be described as a substantial document. Would you agree with that description?
I would indeed, Chairperson.
And then if you go to page 25 of your statement, you talk about what you did with the handover report, and you talk about the events of Tuesday, the 25th of September. For the next bit of your evidence, it's going to be very important to know which day of the week we're on, because the events were developing quite quickly. Can you just indicate to the Chair what happened on that Tuesday, the 25th of September?
Chairperson, at this stage, I can't recall all the interactions, but we're getting quite concerned because a big red flag for us was the 30th of September, which would now be 6 months after the conclusion of our financial year. And so we had met the PFMA requirement by submitting our financials to our accounting authority. But the Companies Act requires you to, in fact, at your AGM, present your financial statements. So, and by now the minister had not disclosed our financial statements in that manner. We've met the PFMA requirements, but the Companies Act requirement still remained here. And as you could see, there was an earlier reference, I can't remember where, in the minister's letter, in fact, to say that he had postponed the AGM to the 25th of September in order to secure the guarantee letter in the correspondence with Minister Gordhan. Well, the 25th came, and then we were informed that it was no longer taking place on the 25th. We were now 5 days away from the deadline in terms of the Companies Act. And the importance about the violation, being in violation of the Companies Act, Chairperson, is that I am the chairperson of a company that I founded. Most of the directors on the board, in big and small, from the dairy farming of Mr. Yankees to various little things to big things. I'm a director of both the London listed and Johannesburg listed part of Investec Bank. I serve on other listed companies. I'm a shareholder in these. If you are a company that is non-compliant with the Companies Act and you're a director on that company, it has quite serious legal implications for you because you are not technically allowed to do that. We would have to declare, and Mr. Lopes, particularly as the JSE, who's the custodian of the Companies Act and in South Africa, would have to declare as the CEO of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange that he's the director of a company that was delinquent, effectively, and in non-compliance of the Companies Act. So the legal and the reputational risks for us to not have our financials presented at an AGM with qualification or without qualification was quite dire. It was about our entire professions and our livelihoods and so on. So we were now, I cannot recall the exact detail of it, but we were on the minister's case about, please, can we get this thing now that we're not having it on the 25th? The minister reassured us. So I eventually had met with the minister on the 25th. It was a Tuesday, I remember very clearly. And I said to him, there was two things that I wanted to discuss. I didn't know if he had anything else. And I recall it very clearly in my mind. It was in some restaurant in Pretoria, some very fancy restaurant. And as he approached me, I was waiting, and I anecdotally said to him, "Where is my pampir?" And just before we say anything, before we sit down, "My pampir, asseblief." And he looked at me completely surprised, and he said to me, Cheryl, did my people not give you the letter? And I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "You know, your people can really let you down sometimes." He said, "It's there. It's been agreed." And he goes further, he says to me, "I come from PG now. I come from Pravin now. If I knew they didn't give you the letter, I could have just asked him for a copy and he could have signed it. I'm really sorry about this." And I said to him, "Will you make sure it gets to me tomorrow? By now..."
And that would be a letter of guarantee?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And then therefore we could have the AGM. I mean, everything was prepared for the AGM. So it's not even like it was, we could have called it at the drop of a hat. We were just waiting for that so that when we present our financials, there would be no qualification. So I said to him, I had now reached a point where 3 of my directors had said to me, I want to record to you that I want to resign. One of them had handed me a letter of resignation. I said to them, "Look, it is a matter of days before our term comes to an end. Please let us not harm this airline. We have managed to bring the company to a level where we were now a bankable proposition, where in fact the whole profile of the company had been rehabilitated. The company's in good health. Most of us were in fact planning to not make ourselves available and just retire. And I pleaded with people, I said, let's do this elegantly, because there will be an impact when people like us resign. People will ask why. And let's not harm, let's just go. If we are fed up, because people were quite fed up by then. That weekend before, I actually had 3 sets of conversations with directors who all wanted to resign. And I said, I cannot understand why. We are just sitting here for a few days. You're not at risk. Well, by Tuesday, people, when the AGM was now, according to the Ministerial, it was no longer on, people started saying, we have got days left in this business week. And so as I said, one member had handed me his letter of resignation. I said, I'm not tabling it. There isn't a board meeting where I can table a letter of resignation anyway, so let us just stay here. So I communicated this to the minister on the Tuesday, and I said to him, look, people are actually quite concerned and quite agitated. So please, can you get this letter to me by tomorrow? He said, yes. By the Thursday morning, we opened the business day, and on the front page of the business day, with no knowledge of ours, the minister has issued, there's a press statement that says, the minister has written to the Speaker of Parliament, Mr. Maxi Sulu, to indicate that the AGM of SAA had been postponed because its financial statements were not in order, or something to that effect, Advocate Hoffman, which was a complete untruth, but also lawfully quite irresponsible to say something like that. When he was sitting in a receipt of our financial statement, he said, in order to allow SAA to complete their financial audit or something to that effect.
Indeed, you'll find the reference to that article at page 140. The challenge, unfortunately, is that it's a very bad copy as I have it. But the essence of it is as you describe, as I recall it. Chair, I don't know if your copy of 140 is quite as bad as mine. But you'll have a copy of it.
I may have a copy of the chair. Yeah.
We might be assisted with a better copy, but I can certainly see in the penultimate paragraph.
I imagine that except for the heading, my one is likely to be as bad as yours.
Yes. But Chairperson, as I said, it's the essence of it, and I hope you would have a chance. I don't know if we can still get one, but Basically, that's what the minister said. He said he had postponed the AGM in order to enable SAA to complete their financial statements, when he was in fact in receipt for it for almost a month by then, and in full compliance. And by then people were hopping mad, and quite understandably so, because now, if left unchallenged, the official record is that our financial statements had not been completed. And as I said, the lawful consequences for us as people, as directors of the board, and in addition to that, as business people, but even as directors of SAA, we were delinquent and non-compliant with the law by going towards that date. Anyway, so I then called the board members and convened.
And the minister didn't discuss his intentions with you before writing to the speaker?
No, not at all, Chairperson.
So
because it's not true.
This whole thing came as a complete surprise to you.
It was, and as I said, somebody called me up and said, "Have you seen the front page of the business there?" And as I said, at this stage, I'm keeping everybody calm and controlled and believing that the shareholder will do the right thing. And then this is what they read. As I said, I mean, I was completely thrown. And that for me was quite shocking. So I called an emergency board meeting for 5 or 5:30 that evening. And those who could make it came in, and those who couldn't were on the phone. And I explained to people what had transpired since the Tuesday, because the weekend I gave them an undertaking, I will meet with the minister. And at that stage, I genuinely believed that the minister had the letter in hand. And so I had given them an undertaking that I would do my best, and I was quite convinced there was a misunderstanding somewhere, and we would have it, because it just was too, I mean, I couldn't contemplate that somebody in a senior position like a minister could not understand the consequences of letting something happen by default, that lawfully there was no, everything was covered. So the basis on which was the basis on which the minister spoke to you about the letter of guarantee when you met, when you were supposed to bring it, when you expected him to bring it, was the basis on which he spoke to you that he had already signed it and was expecting you to have it already? Was that the basis on which he spoke? Sorry, Chairperson, maybe just a slight correction. The letter of guarantee is signed by the Minister of Finance.
Oh, but it's given to him.
Yes, and then sent to him. We, as the entity, don't engage with Treasury, so we don't know if he has done, when it was brought to him, if it was brought to him, whether he had satisfied Treasury with everything that they require for him.
Or he would be
the interface,
the person to speak to the Minister of Finance or correspond with the Minister of Finance, and then come back to you, go back to the Minister of Finance, and so on.
That is correct, Minister.
So the letter of guarantee, which would have had been signed by the Minister of Finance if it was there already, would have had to come to you via the minister, via Minister Kikaba.
That is correct, Chairperson.
And on the day that you met, were you expecting that he would have it or not really?
Chairperson, I had in fact expected he, on the basis of the conversations we've had since February, March with him, that he would by now have done what was necessary, and if Treasury or anybody required further information from us, he would come back to us and say they're not satisfied. There was a long lead time to actually get this.
Basically, it was long overdue.
It was long overdue, and I'd expected it would come through the system.
Yes.
I should not have had to pick up a phone even to ask him. He had agreed with us when we sat down at the beginning of the year that he would secure this letter. He would do what it takes. He was, in fact, the one who was most militant about it with us.
But to go back to my question, the way, what he said to you when you said, "Where is my letter of guarantee?" What he said to you suggested to you that he had given it to somebody to give it to SAA or to you.
Yes. Who had let him down.
In other words, he had seen it.
Yes,
he knew, he expected that somebody from his office had already given it to SAA or to you. That was your understanding.
That was my understanding, Chairman.
Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, if I may just follow that up, because after receipt of Ms. Carolus' statement, this issue of these number of days over which there was interactions about the guarantee was clearly of importance. And so the Commission followed up on that aspect and obtained documents from National Treasury.
Yes.
Those are the documents in Exhibit N2 that I said we would deal with today. I understand, Chair, that you have a copy of Exhibit N2 with you, and I know that Ms. Carolus has been provided with one. N2 is the supplementary bundle to Minister Gordon's evidence.
Yes, I've got N2.
If you go to page 93 of that Exhibit N2.
9.3.
9.3.
Okay.
You will see the document that was produced within National Treasury for Minister Gordon's attention, and it relates, you'll see in the heading, to the request by South African Airways for a letter of support and a 5 billion rand guarantee for going concern purposes. Before I go further in relation to these documents, I'd just like to remind us all, and for the benefit of Ms. Carolus, who might have missed Minister Gordon's evidence, what Minister Gordon said about this process, because he was asked about it in his evidence. And just for your records, Chair, the relevant transcript is the transcript of 21 November 2018, and the discussion begins at page 41 of that transcript. Chair, I have made copies.
Yeah.
Just to be of assistance, so we didn't have to have the whole transcript here. If I may beg leave to hand that up. I'll just summarize what is happening in this part of the transcript. Mr. Pretorius is asking Minister Gordon about the circumstances around the SAA guarantee. And if you go over the page to page 42, what Minister Gordon explains there in broad outline, because as I have his evidence, he didn't have a perfect recollection of these days and what happened on them. But he says as a general proposition, if you go sort of a third way down in the page, he starts talking about the FLC. The FLC is the Fiscal Liability Committee. He describes a process where, when there's a request for a guarantee that's received through the relevant state department, this Fiscal Liability Committee convenes, looks at it, it investigates, it prepares a report. That report first goes to the DG, as he says around the middle of the page, and then the DG considers it, and after the DG it goes to him, the minister, who is the final signatory with the lawful authority to approve the guarantee. And he concludes in the middle of that page to say that they are ordinarily not in the business of saying in advance that you'll get a guarantee, because you have to wait for this entire process to be completed. So that's a background to the pages that begin at 93 of Exhibit N2, because what 93 is that memo prepared for consideration by the various officials. It's dated 21 September. So we're at the end of the preceding week in which you were having your engagements with Minister Gigaba. And what you'll see if you go through these documents to page 102 is that the recommendation of the Fiscal Liaison Committee is contained there. It's in two parts. The recommendation to the Minister is that he concurs to SAA's request for the 5 billion guarantee for the period, and that he sign the attached letter addressed to the Minister of Public Enterprises should he concur with the contents and support the guarantee request. If you go over the page to page 103, you will see that his DG, Mr. Fuzile, signed his confirmation that he approved the recommendation on the 26th of September, and similarly Minister Gordon signed his approval on the 26th of September. I'd like to go back to your evidence, Ms. Carolus, because I said I was going to place some significance on these days between Tuesday and Wednesday, and Thursday ultimately. But it's on Tuesday, as I have your evidence, that you met with Minister Gigaba, and Minister Gigaba said he had the letter, and he couldn't understand why you didn't have it yet. Is that correct?
That is correct.
That was the 25th of September, the Tuesday. But what we've seen from the documents obtained from National Treasury is that Minister Gordhan's assent was only recorded the next day, the 26th. And if you go over to page 104, you will see that that is the letter that Minister Gordhan signed informing Minister Gigaba about the approval of the guarantee. And if you go over the page to 105, you will see that that also bears the date of the 26th of September, 2012. Is that consistent with what Minister Gigaba told you on Tuesday, the 25th?
No, it is not.
If you go over one further page to 106, you will see that this is a fax confirmation report. It's sent in the wee hours of 6:30 in the morning on the date of the 27th of September. We are now on the Thursday. And what you will see is that is a fax confirmation of the letter signed on the 26th by Minister Gordhan, going to a number 021-465-2381. Don't want to take too long on this, but I can assure you, Chair, that's the number of the Ministry of Public Enterprises and is the number for communicating with Minister Gigaba, which is clear from the August 31st letter that we went to previously. So this goes to Minister Gigaba only on the morning of Thursday, the 27th of September. And despite this, as I have your evidence, you were told on the Tuesday he had it already and that you'd get it on the Wednesday. Is that correct?
That is correct, Chairperson.
And as I understand your evidence from your statement at page 25, you got nothing on the Wednesday, and then you were confronted on the Thursday morning with the Business Day article, which recorded the statement that Minister Gigaba had made to Parliament about your audit report not having been finalized and not ready. Is that correct?
That is correct, Chairperson.
Is there the issuing of the letter of guarantee, does it, is it consistent with what Minister Gigaba told the Speaker about SAA, or is it neutral? In other words,
no, Chairperson. In fact, they are two very distinct matters which only become related when we want the going concern thing. But the financial statements were finalized and in fact signed and certified by the auditing firm of SAA to say that, looking backwards, all things were in good order. There was nothing that was picked up that in fact was a matter of emphasis that was worrying. So the good health was signed off. So the financial statements were complete.
How long before this date when he wrote to the minister or to the Speaker, how long before that were the financial statements already had been completed?
We submitted it formally on the 31st of August to both the DPE and the Ministry of Finance and the Department of Finance, the Treasury, because that's the lawful cut-off point. We had them, they were prepared even before that. But we were hanging on to them because they would then be presented together with an AGM to, in fact, submit to the AGM the annual report and the financial statements of the company. So it was absolutely clear that our statements had been finalized. It was incorrect to say the statements were not finalized. At an AGM, in addition to submitting your financial statements and your annual report, the board has to express a view to say that this company is a going concern, and that is that the company will be able to fulfill its legal obligations and to be able to conduct trade without any risk to partners.
Had there ever been any discussion involving you and Mr. Kigaba that related to the financial statements prior to him sending this letter to the speaker, in which he would have been told that the financial statements are ready and this is what they say, or not really?
No, but at the time, Chairperson, at the time the Minister made that statement on the 27th of September, he had been in receipt, and we had SAA as receipts, and in fact he indicates this in his letter to Minister Godan, that he had received our financial statements, our completed and audited, clean set of results on the 31st of August, as is lawfully required in terms of the PFMA. So there was absolutely no concerns raised by the auditors. He was aware of it. He received it as such. And we were just now waiting to present those statements to the formal AGM process, which would comply with the
and
obligation.
And he wouldn't have, even if for one reason or another, although the statements may have been received in his departments, even if for one reason or another he might not have looked at them, he couldn't write to the speaker and say what he said without checking what the statements say, or whether they are there or not, isn't it?
Chairperson, I would have
I'm just trying to understand why.
It's quite a serious allegation, Chairperson, to accuse a state-owned company of breaking the law, because at that stage we would have been in violation of the PFMA, and it's one of the pieces of oversight that Parliament takes very seriously, is any state entity, be they a company or a department, who's in violation of the PFMA, it's firstly unlawful, and certainly viewed in a very serious light by Parliament in particular. And so to make that allegation without the facts, even if you are ignorant, I would just say for somebody in a position of responsibility to do that is just grossly irresponsible. But secondly, Chairperson, Minister Gigaba knew that everything was ready, the financial statements included. Even the very fact that we only submitted it to his department on the 31st of August was because we were holding it back so that it could go with a letter of guarantee and the AGM would follow. And so he knew everything was ready for that AGM.
Just go back to telling me the basis for you saying he knew. Because if indeed, factually he knew, but went on to write to the Speaker of Parliament and said something that was not true, you can understand how serious that could be. But I'm just wondering that even if you haven't seen them, I would have thought that as minister, before you write to the Speaker about something like that, you'd call at least the chairperson of the board and say, what's happening about the statements? And if you are not sure, but obviously if you are sure. No, so I'm trying to understand whether you are able to say, there is a meeting in which I was there and he was there and we talked about the statements and I told him they are ready, or there is a letter he wrote maybe to the Minister of Finance or to us in which he said that the statements are ready, because if that is there, then it shows that he had personal knowledge.
But Chairperson, in fact, I think Advocate Hofmeyer can just take me
Yes.
back to the document. He did indeed write on the 21st of September.
He did.
Yes.
Well, he wrote earlier than that. He wrote on the 31st of August to the Minister of Finance to say that he was receiving your audited financial statements that day. The reference is at page 155 of your bundle, Exhibit R. This is not anyone other than Minister Gigaba writing. It's Minister Gigaba writing. He writes on the 31st of August.
Let me just get there.
Of course, Chair.
Yes.
So this is a letter written, if you see over the page at 156, it bears the signature of Minister Gigaba. It is written on the 31st of August. It's written to Minister Gordhan, and it says at the top of page 156, in accordance with SAA's obligations under section 55(1)(d) of the PFMA, I'm skipping a few words, I have agreed, this is Minister Gigaba speaking, I have agreed with its board of directors that SAA should proceed to submit its annual report and annual financial statements to the Auditor General, National Treasury, and the Director General of my department today. That is speaking about the 31st of August 2012. If I may then, Chair, just to complete
Just to hang on, so today there implies that they are ready.
Indeed,
That's why
because
they could be submitted
precisely,
on that day.
Precisely, Chair.
So,
He submits it.
so the sentence clearly implies that he is aware that they are ready. They can be submitted on that
Indeed,
day.
Chair. We submit there's no other appropriate interpretation of what is being said in that letter. Chair, if I may then, just for the benefit of Ms. Carolus, give you, because I've kindly been handed by my learned leader, an electronic copy of that Business Day report, which enables me to read it more clearly.
Yes.
I'm going to... I was supposed to keep the screen alive. I wasn't able to achieve that.
And
So
you
I'm
don't
going
know what
need
to do
my-
now.
I don't. My learned leader will equip me. Thank you so much. What then is reported on the Thursday?
You have to make sure you finish reading before it
Yes, I
goes.
know. I'm going to do my best to keep it alive, so to speak. So Business Day then reports on Thursday morning, the 27th of September, 2 days after you've met with Minister Gigaba, that he said the following in a letter to the Speaker of Parliament. Mr. Gigaba said the airline had been unable to finalize its annual report due to the need to address its, quote, immediate financial challenges for its auditors to complete the financial statements. Ms. Carolus, that is, as I have your evidence, what you say is false.
That is patently so, Chairperson.
Yes,
Yes.
that's as you recall the article that you read on that day.
That is correct, Chairperson.
Okay.
And that article appears at page 140 of Exhibit R. Ms. Carolus, if you can just assist us, because what becomes apparent from the documents we've obtained from National Treasury is that Minister Gordhan only approved the guarantee on Wednesday the 26th, and it was submitted to the DPE only on the morning of the 27th. But as I understand your evidence, you were told in a meeting on Tuesday the 25th that Minister Gigaba already had that letter of guarantee. Can you explain that?
I'm afraid I can't speak for Minister Gigaba. I took him at his word, Chairperson. I have no knowledge.
Thank you. You then at page 25 tell us what happened in the remainder of Thursday, the 27th of September. It begins with the statement that 8 of the 12 directors resigned from the board on the 27th of September. Can you tell us about those events?
Chairperson, as I said, with this article on the front page of the Business Day, I was quite taken aback and deflated because I had asked the member, I had consistently assured the board members, notwithstanding a growing view amongst them, that the minister was at best negligent and at worst, in fact, hostile to the board of his company as our shareholder. And I had, as I said, consistently given them this reassurance, but also asked that at the minimum, that we seek to not harm the company and the reputation of our country, in fact, with rash actions on our side. But when this appeared on the front page, I really felt the minister had just checkmated me. The fact that he's writing to Parliament, giving an untruth, as we can see, is now corroborated in his own correspondence, that he was lying to the minister, to the Speaker of the House, and being quite reckless about the implications, because if that is a public record that stands, I would have had to declare to every company I serve on that I'm now the director of a delinquent company that has in fact violated the law. And that timing of that was going to become true by the 30th of, so it would have been Sunday the 30th of September, and we're now Thursday, late afternoon. So I convened a meeting of the board, and I said to them, now I had reached the end of the road. That I thought this was just an utter betrayal to make that utterance to a lawful body like our Parliament for the record that the company that we were the custodians of had in fact violated the law. Because whilst we were still in compliance of the Companies Act until the Sunday, if what he was saying to the Speaker and to Parliament was true, then we were in violation of the PFMA, because the cut-off date for us to submit in terms of the PFMA was the 31st of August. And that's quite a serious thing for anybody to do. And the insensitivity and the recklessness, and as by then I also, the many members of the board concluded, the hostility. They didn't know what his motives were, but it was quite clear to them that this man was hostile to this board and was determined to, in fact, ruin our reputations. And I just thought it was the height of irresponsibility, because I had explained to him what the consequences were, just in case he didn't understand it, but I did expect that he would have. As I said, Minister Hogan certainly did. She convened a whole workshop with us to say, you are going to abide by this, and I promise you I will abide by this. And then for the minister to go on public record on the front page of a newspaper is reported of having gone to Parliament to report us as people who have violated the PFMA was just, I don't know, breathtaking. So I said, I informed I informed the board that I had now reached the end of the road and I was going to resign. That I couldn't see my way clear to take a risk with a man who could distort or lie like that. That I could trust this man between that Thursday and the Sunday close of business, that he would have effected all the remedies, whether to call the AGM without the letter and the qualification on the audits, not unusual in companies in the business world that you have a qualification of that nature, or indeed that he would get the letter of guarantee for us, because at that stage we still were not in possession of the letter of guarantee, or even an indication about the letter of guarantee, and yet he makes an utterance like that. I just thought that even I had now reached the end. And it was quite a tough thing for me to do, because I had really given the minister a fair chance at being compromised by a series of things. Anyway, so I said I was going to resign, and then 7 other directors felt with me very strongly, in fact, that as a matter of protest, but also to protect ourselves lawfully and our reputations, but felt we wanted to send a very strong message that we were not going to tolerate people playing loose and fast with our reputations and our legal standing. Chairperson.
Ms. Carolus, you resigned en masse, all 8 of you, on Thursday, the 27th of September. But as I have it, and you've indicated already in your evidence, you went to great lengths to endeavour not to harm SAA as a consequence of that resignation. Can you please explain to us what motivated you in doing so? And I would, after you've done that, like to take you to one of the reports about the comments you made in relation to Minister Gigaba at the time of your resignation. But first of all, why was it important not to harm SAA as a consequence of the resignation?
Chairperson, there were a few reasons, but the most important one was here was an entity in quite severe state of disrepair at multiple levels when we were appointed to serve, and that we had built up, not so much as a board even, but just as a management team. We had really built up, under the leadership of Ms. Mzimela, a really credible, hard-working, honest team where the values were readjusted. SAA was a place where people wanted to work again. And we understood that the consequences of a resignation could be quite dire, and especially if we go with a lot of controversy. We were on the verge of being able to secure in the regular markets funding for the airline. And if SAA was back in a negative, if there were negative perceptions, the knock-on effect was just too horrendous. The question of the fact that we needed that money, regardless of what the cost is, but just people would lend us money, period. We find ourselves back in a situation now, after this procedures of state capture that's been carrying on, where many of our state entities are broken and where no one wants to lend the money because they are considered such a high risk that it's very unlikely in their current state and with their current business plans and leadership that you would ever be able to recover your money. So it wasn't even a question, no matter how greedy you might be, you're just not going to lend the money because they're so bad. And that's where SAA started off from. And so here we were, and so we knew it was a bit of a nuclear option. We had really gone along. We were right up to the Thursday, and the Sunday was D-Day for us. Not only did the minister, and I don't know why it took so long for him to get that decision through Treasury, so between him and Treasury, they must account for that. But we started in February to flag this need, and we left it in his hands. We were never told, you haven't given us enough information. You know, any serious matters that caused concern, that caused this delay. So we had given the minister a lot of slack until the Thursday. If we didn't act on that Thursday, we would have been in violation of the Companies Act. I said in 24 hours, we would have, by the Sunday, not 24 hours. But the 24 hours is the Friday would be the close of business. It wouldn't have been possible to conduct many things after that day. But so firstly, in response to the question, Chairperson, we were worried about just the financial and economic consequences for SAA and by implication for our country. Because at the risk of sounding immodest again, I think that the caliber of people that we had on that board, if people like that get up in public and make a meal of the behavior of a senior member of the cabinet, it would just send a very bad message that we thought would have unintended consequences. And therefore, I pleaded with people that how we would manage the communications going out of there, but we thought we wanted to communicate and we made it our business. But we didn't call a press conference, we issued a statement. I was available to respond to the one newspaper that we issued the statement because we just wanted it on the public record. And especially given the track record before, like that Thursday's press statement, that morning's press statement he made. But subsequently also, if we look at the utterances he made, it was a very good move that we firstly compiled that handover report that has a clear documentation that's backed up by processes that's recorded in his own department. And secondly, that in fact, just the financials that were signed off by his department, by independent auditors, and all the regulatory authorities disproved that. But we nevertheless felt that whilst we wanted to be on the record in our own words rather than having to correct him, we still pleaded that let us just be careful. So nobody spoke, in fact, on the matter. So there was a general carefulness. I must say, in hindsight, Chairperson, maybe I was even more mindful of the fact that he was a senior member of my organization as well, you know. But I must say that I was not going to protect him when he was in fact placing the country and its institutions like SAA at risk. I was not going to tolerate that, and I could not expect other members on the board to do that. But we wanted to strike that balance.
Thank you. As I have it, you describe those events at paragraph 79 on page 29 of your statement. In the following terms, and if I may just be permitted to read what you say in the second part of that paragraph and then ask for your comment. You say from the middle of that paragraph, both Minister Gigaba and Mr. Mahlangu exerted pressure on the board and management in this regard. There you're referring to the Jet Airways events and the New Age business. You say, I have no doubt that the board at that time was seen as an obstacle to these attempts to influence its decisions. Indeed, the mass resignation on 27 September 2012 feels more like a constructive dismissal in order to pave the way for a more compliant board. Is that an accurate recordal of the view you hold, Ms. Carolus?
In fact, I feel even more strongly about it, having been party or being privy to some of the matters which have come here, indeed, a chairperson.
Thank you. I'd then finally like to conclude with the comments you make at page 28 of your statement.
I'm sorry, before you do, you go there. Are you, your last answer to Ms. Hofmeyr, is it because of, is that view you hold about why things happened the way they did, leading to what happened when you were at SAA board? Does that kind of explain to you why maybe Mr. Gigaba behaved in the manner in which he behaved, which you might not have understood at that time?
Chairperson.
In other words, you told me earlier on, you couldn't understand why he would, he wrote to the speaker and said something that was not true. And there may have been other instances when you or members of your board thought he seemed to reveal a hostile attitude towards the board, but sometimes he would say he was quoted out of context and so on. And from what my understanding of your evidence is that at that stage, sometimes you were not sure why. So I'm just asking whether your view is that it may or may not have had anything to do with what you say in paragraph 79, namely an attempt to remove a board that might not have been so cooperative, maybe in his view.
Chairperson, you're correct in saying that it seems so irrational and inexplicable. Many of my fellow board members, quite early on in that year, they read it as hostility. We have a hostile shareholder. In fact, I think that's what the one person who did the letter of resignation said, that they really felt the minister's actions were hostile in the extreme. I didn't believe it, but it was so irrational. I mean, here's a grown person who is, one of the things that I always admired of Minister Gigaba when he was a young man emerging through the ranks of the ANC Youth League, that really endeared him to me, was that He was intellectually very astute. And so this just didn't add up. This was just madness. And initially I thought it was just benign because of my healthy cynicism I have about what politicians do and how they behave and how I expect them to behave. And later it just became weird. I just couldn't explain because my fellow board members kept on asking me, well, how do you explain this? We're telling you this man is hostile. He's a hostile shareholder. And Chairperson, I must say that as I watched events unfold, long before the commission started to sit, before things were officially placed on the record to this commission, it became quite clear what Minister Gigaba had sadly fallen into from his lifestyle. I mean, I don't want to be petty, just all manner of things about. I got to know him as a young man of exceptional intellect, of absolute moral integrity, modest, humble, and in fact, I thought I projected him in the ANC as the poster kid of what an ANC Youth League president should look like into the future, where we were not at war, but where we were building a country, that he was that kind of person. So he's not stupid. So that's what was irrational for me. But I must say I've been quite sad at what he has degenerated into, because it is quite clear that he has been quite central to a lot of wrongdoing in many of the state-owned enterprises. If I look at SAA, just, the fact that within a very short period of time of him arriving there, he seeks to virtually get us to hand over a part of our business that was showing promise to some outside entity. He was our shareholder. And just listening to some of the evidence here, but also some of the parliamentary hearings that happened around ESCOM over the last few years, it just raised a huge amount of disquiet and disappointment in a man who had so much going for him, but he doesn't have the excuse of stupidity. He certainly didn't. It was quite calculated what he did.
As I understand your evidence, at the time when, around end of September, the terms of office of the board members, or at least some of them, were about to come to an end. Am I right?
That is correct, Chairperson.
Would that have been, they were not, it would have been only for all the members of the board or not? Or most?
I think it would have been for some of the initial people, because you're appointed for a term of 3 years.
Oh.
I can't remember that detail, Chairperson.
And I guess some would remain behind for continuity in terms of terms.
We had urged in our handover report very strongly, because we found ourselves with just one person. And so in the handover report, we make 2 points. We say, one, we do think that there should be at least 1/3 should be retained, always for continuity is best practice. And secondly, we thought the term should maybe be a bit longer, because you make decisions over a very long cycle. Your corporate plan is 4 years. But so as I said, the reason why it wasn't too material was that most people were desperately wanting to leave, and eventually agreed, a natural process for you to be relieved of this high-risk space that you believe you are in here is to just wait for the AGM. And it was supposed to take place anytime from May. And we traditionally, the minister appoints as to the shareholder, appoints, reappoints, renews, refreshes, and those whose terms have expired, he applies his mind to. And we spoke about it a little bit, but I just said to him, most people would want to move on. Didn't go into detail about why, but certainly at least the 8 and some of the other people also who subsequently resigned also wanted to leave. Ms. Mzimela and them were also at a point where, in fact, Ms. Mzimela in particular was wanting to resign when we resigned, because she's been at the front of the full frontal attack of these people and their efforts, much more so than even the board. She was subjected to far worse, undignified treatment. And we, in fact, implored on her to stay, because we thought that if she leaves with us, it would just destabilize the entire team. And she subsequently, she couldn't stay for another 2 weeks. They were clearly wanting to get rid of her too.
Well, the problem with the suggestion, at least as at September, that maybe he did all of these things because he wanted the board to leave so that he could put in a more compliant board, is since the terms of office of these board members was going to be coming to an end, wouldn't he have better just wait for the terms to end and then, so that he wouldn't have to resort to any of these things?
Chairperson, I think he also sought to...
In other words, what I'm saying, I'm looking at all angles.
Yes, no,
and I'm saying he could say, why would I want to push you out when you are going to go anyway shortly?
Chairperson, if there was a healthy relationship between a shareholder and directors of a board, particularly, as I say again at the risk of sounding immodest, the caliber of people he had on his board, and I don't want to diminish from subsequent boards and their own standing, but you would have imagined that it ought to have ended on a healthy basis, but we had, unwittingly, it wasn't a conscious act, but we had thwarted a number of things. So this had carried on over a period of a year. Him diminishing our, seeking, I believe he seek to not only get rid of us, but he seek to diminish our stature and our standing so that if we challenge him on anything, he would have successfully created a bit of a cloud over the names of the people on that board, which was quite a difficult thing to do. I think he would have wanted us to sign off on things like the Jet Airways and the New Age things, and we just thwarted him every step of the way. And that's why for me it was irrational why he wouldn't, was he just, so, as I said, that discrepancy between the signatures of him and Minister Gordhan is something that I still find puzzling. I mean, I've only learnt it in the course of the proceedings here. But what was quite clear was that he had no intention of getting any of the people who were in. I must say, Chairperson, that subsequently 2 other members of that board who were reappointed also resigned. And virtually the only person who remained standing was in fact Ms. Mieni. And from what I could recall from public utterances, even those 2 members were citing lack of governance that was completely out of hand at South African Airways, that through the executive authority, whether it was cabinet, whether it was the minister, whether it was the president himself was directly implicated along the line about who gave Ms. Mieni the comfort to be able to do that. I think it is common cause that Minister Gigaba for a long time had enjoyed quite a lot of confidence of the president. And at the time, I don't know how all of that added up. It's beyond my, but that's why it was so puzzling, Chairperson, that we could really, because he knew that, you know, that we could just, all we could do was just go to the AGM, and that in fact most people had indicated that that's what their desire was. But it seems as if you wanted to really tarnish people's images as well in the process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Carolus, if I may just ask 1 or 2 questions as a follow-up from the Chair's latest engagement with you. There would be no bar to reappointment of board members should they wish to stand, would there?
No, there wouldn't be. Chair.
So, notwithstanding the fact that your term was coming to an end at September, if there'd been a good relationship and continuity was important, those members could have stood again to be members of the board. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And of the 8 who resigned with you, did anyone make themselves available again to serve on SAA's board?
No, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
If I may then proceed to page 28, which is really your concluding remarks of your statement. As I read paragraphs 77 and 78 on that page, what you do is you make some comments about what happened to SAA after that mass resignation on the 27th of September. If I could ask you to take the Chair through the concerns that you expressed there about what had happened to SAA after your departure.
Chairperson, I start off by saying I'm sad to note certain developments in SAA. I must say that I still fly SAA as my airline of choice. I am a lifetime platinum member because of how much I fly on the airline. I chair a board, and many of the boards I sit on, I could fly first class. I choose not to. I choose to fly SAA. And every time I get on the airline, I spoke with one of the former board members who came today, who landed from New York, and just said how 3 out of 4 of the audiovisual sets on the aircraft, and I'm sure it's a story all of us are familiar with, just wasn't working. I know how I get onto an airplane, it's happened to me thrice that I can recollect, where a passenger in the business class section is apoplectic because their bed doesn't work, their screen doesn't work. And we know that SAA, the prices of SAA, it's not able to be as competitive because it's flying with this ancient aircraft that weighs way more than the modern aircraft that Air Kenya, Air Ethiopia, that they are flying. So the fuel costs associated with that is enormous, and that immediately means that SAA's ticketing pricing is not always the most competitive. They said price is not one of the strong points they can take for granted. But as I said, Chairperson, 3 times I have found myself in the business class section, and a passenger would be apoplectic because they paid for a live flat bed and they don't have a bed. The system isn't working. Just recently again, it's almost by exception that you don't get an announcement to say, we have a problem with our entertainment system, we have to reboot the whole system, it's going to take 20 minutes. And it happens a few times in each flight. I think those of us who have flown in the business class over the past while would know that. So that ancient fleet, which was already too ancient when our term started in 2009, are still the aircraft, the majority of the aircraft that SAA is operating with. So that's the first thing. That fleet has been allowed to degenerate, and we're still stuck with it. There are far more modern versions, as I said, that is around that means your fuel cost is greatly reduced.
Ms. Carolus, if I may just, interject there. One of the proposals, as I have it, that you made in the handover report was for a renewal of the fleet. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Indeed, it was in fact one of the most critical things that we thought had to happen, and that related to fixing the balance sheet. So not only getting a cash injection from the shareholder, but we had to demonstrate when people do a due diligence on your book, when you apply for a loan to a bank, and it's usually in billions, they look at your books and they see how you run your business. And if they pick up just that there was inefficiencies that were so large scale, so fixing that balance sheet and getting the efficiencies going was a crucial part to getting SA to a point where we were able to borrow in the capital markets with comfort.
Can you explain why that wasn't taken forward?
Chairperson,
Would she know?
No. I think there was some. I can only refer to matters that came in. In fact, I think Parliament made some references yesterday. I didn't watch the whole proceedings, but I caught a snippet in the news when the chairperson of the committee, portfolio committee there, in fact said they were now handing over Ms. Mieni, amongst other people, for some action because they did what I think is unlawful. You can't refuse to come to Parliament when Parliament calls you. But there were a few people, Ms. Mieni was one of them. In the newspapers, and Ms. Mieni was asked to come to Parliament, amongst other things, to account on this matter, that we had, together with, first as a board of which she was a part, we had developed a strategy, we had costed that strategy, and we had looked at options for funding that strategy. Central to this was fleet renewal, both because of the age of the fleet, as well as getting a better mix of aircraft that wasn't just the two extremes, short haul or very long haul, but that particularly enable us to get the ones that can fly to Africa or the 6.5 hours into Latin American destinations, which are, or India for that matter. So fleet renewal was absolutely essential for us to be competitive. Second part of that was that our competitors, in terms of the people who were eyeing the Africa route aggressively, and that east-west corridor from Asia into Africa and onward into Latin America, the BRICS axis, the east-west axis that we call it. To be able to do that, you needed to, in fact, get a shareholder injection. Because, as I said, Chairperson, it's like any factory. If you have old machines and there's newer ones, and your competition. So sometimes the shareholder puts money in there, not to pay for mismanagement in the past, but in fact to enable you to keep your edge. SAA at that stage still had an edge on a number of fronts against, particularly, I think with Emirates it's a different ball game there altogether because the level of support they enjoy from their government. But all three of these airlines, Emirates, Kenya and Ethiopia, but Kenya and Ethiopia is similar to us, but countries that have much smaller GDPs, they understood the importance of capitalizing their airline adequately, and it became very easy for them to in fact overtake SAA. SAA has lost an enormous amount of market share, even against what started out as smaller airlines from smaller countries with much less money, but who understood the importance of capitalizing. So we have now officially been overtaken by Air Kenya and Air Ethiopia. In other ways, they've stolen our market share into some markets. Another example is we look at with this aging fleet we have. We used to have up to 4 frequencies a day of flights to London. Today we have 1. The implication of that, again, I alluded to this earlier, Chairperson, we've lost 75% not only of passengers. We've lost the jobs on those flights, 75% of them we've lost. We've lost 75% of the jobs of air chefs. We've lost 75% of the people who used to supply from toilet paper to salads. And then perhaps more, even in addition, I shouldn't say more sinisterly, in addition, we have totally eroded the capacity of what used to be a world-class facility called South African Airways Technical, SAA Technical. A few weekends ago, I just read in the newspapers that Lufthansa was going into partnership with Comair, that's a privately owned airline, to in fact set up an alternate to SAA Technical because the capacity didn't exist. That same Lufthansa used to bring the aircraft from Europe and incur the cost of bringing them here to South Africa, to Airways Park for servicing. It's like our pilots. Anywhere you walked in the world, you mentioned SAA Technical, it was right up there amongst the best. That capacity is gone. And those came because of Ms. Mieni's bizarre intervention, completely unorthodox from what the newspaper said and what has been submitted to Parliament, that Ms. Mieni took the extraordinary step to place the whole fleet acquisition on hold. She took issue with members of a board. Members of a board actually wrote well, there were 2 boards. I think it was another board down the line. So not our immediate successor board, there was another board that came in, and those people took the step of reporting the minister to the authorities, to the executive authority, a substantial chunk of those people. And then subsequently, Minister Gigaba was removed and Ms. Mieni remained. And Ms. Mieni decided to also place on hold the financing, and in fact came in the name of transformation with something that she argued was a black-owned financial house. To fund a fleet, you do not go to a start-up entity. I mean, it's just the most bizarre things, and that's why, as I said, it's very hard. Ordinarily, one cannot pin things on an individual, but here was a person who acted in total flagrant disregard for Parliament and her accountability as a citizen and as a director, but also justified her board and, in fact, the lawful agreements that we had with the Accounting Authority and Cabinet for our business plan, our growth strategy, and the funding strategy.
Thank you.
Chair, just to clarify for the future evidence that will be led in the course of the Commission, all of these aspects that Ms. Carolus has touched on in the period after her time at the board will be traversed in detail. She's simply, as I have it, setting the scene for the further evidence that will be presented.
Yeah, no, that will be necessary.
Indeed. Chair, those are the questions that I have. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just one or two. And can I go back to the new age? After the meeting that you had with the Director General of the Department of Public Enterprises and Mr. Mahlangu and the CEO of SAA, I think it was the meeting which the DG called and you went to, where the discussion was on the new age. Is there any decision that SAA changed after that meeting in regard to the new age that it had made before?
I can't speak on that, Chairperson, because again, as I said, it's matters that ordinarily is far out of sight of the board.
But
so I think you'll have to ask management about that, Chairperson.
But in terms of the discussions at that meeting, which you did attend, the basis on which the meeting ended, did it not entail that there would be any decision changed or any new decision, or that the new age would be something would be given to them that they had asked for but had not been given before?
Chairperson, I've seen the new age distributed, but so there is a presence of the new age, as with all other newspapers who ask. One of the considerations there always is weight, so how many newspapers get put on. So from my limited understanding, I think they sort of divided up equally and fairly, between the different newspapers. I can't speak about numbers, I can't speak about advertising in the new age, the costings of, whether more was paid to New Age versus other newspapers. I don't have any knowledge of that, Chairperson.
What would you say were the main differences in approach between, on the one hand, former Minister Barbara Hogan and former Minister Gigaba as ministers of public enterprises in relation to dealing with SAA issues or the board? What would you say the main differences appeared to be, if there were any?
No, it was chalk and cheese, Chairperson, that I think in its the centrality of it all is about the fact that here were two ministers, one of whom understood in very simple terms the difference in the roles between shareholder, board, and management. Minister Hogan would never ask the board to do something that's a management matter. She would never seek to discuss matters with us that hadn't been processed through our management teams. They were the people running the business. So that is a fundamental difference, that Minister Hogan was absolutely scrupulous and quite simple. When we dealt with her and she raised her displeasure, and she did on occasions, and was not shy to be firm and tough about the expectations, you could understand immediately that it was that she was concerned about you exercising your roles properly or delivering on the expectations. All of that was transparent and upfront. So from a governance point of view, a huge difference. It was shocking where SA ended up under Minister Gigaba, where, as I said, where even the culture, where you pass it down in the system to your members of staff and to your, because you set the tone at the top. And when you set the tone where the lines are so blurred and non-existent and it's a free-for-all, your legal advisor can jump in a discussion that ought to be with junior people around newspaper distribution. You actually significantly erode the question of governance right down the value chain, because there is no longer clarity of roles at all levels in the organization. And also where your members feel that it's actually okay for them to start telling a state-owned entity how they must conduct their business, when in fact the state-owned entity were people who were professionals in that particular field. People at Eskom were people in the energy field who knew how to run a public utility on that. So for somebody to sit in might be a very good professional in a government department, it's just inappropriate, and that's why those roles are so clearly demarcated in the various legal pieces. But those things are also unlawful. That in fact, effectively, what Minister Gigabo and his team were often expecting us to do was in direct violation of those legal parameters of what sits within the remit of shareholder, the board, and of management. So that was a fundamentally big one. And the second one, Chairperson, I would say quite frankly, was a values thing that drew on the foundations of what this brave democracy of ours was seeking to build. We were trying to build a different world order where we served. And I can't remember who it was. It might have been Minister Hogan. But it's something that I firmly align myself with. It's a very dangerous, slippery slope when you see yourself as ruling people as opposed to serving people or even governing, because governing implies that you mediate a set of interests that you have to weigh up and treat fairly, as opposed to ruling. And I think that Minister Gigaba imbued that Department of Public Enterprises with a sense of ruling and issuing instructions, which of course is very dangerous for accountability of elected people and the people who are in their teams, because ministers are and cabinet are people who are entrusted with one of the most sacred things in our democracy, and that is people's vote. People trust you. It's the highest trust that anyone in a country can give. And for you to actually take that and do with it what they did, I'm not surprised that people have lost faith in those whom they elected, both formally through the number of votes they cast, and in fact for the number of votes the ruling party got. But maybe I'm wading into too much politics. But so I would say the two differences is governance and the question of embedding and building on a value system that seeks to serve and a value system that seeks to grow an economy that will eradicate poverty, because you can't eradicate poverty and inequality without that.
And of course, while Minister Barbara Hogan was minister, there was an approach, wasn't there, to her and maybe to the board, I'm not sure, to say SAA should terminate the Mumbai route. And during Minister Gigaba's term, there was that approach. Do you know what Minister Barbara Hogan's attitude was to that approach to when she was minister?
Minister Hogan was quite clear that there was a process around routes, and the only basis on which you make it is whether it makes economic sense for us to run that route. We have often, SAA still finds itself sometimes where people say, why don't you fly between London and Durban? And then my comrades in KZN really believe that there's a gross injustice if we don't. We can only fly. I see you smiling, Chairperson. I mean, nothing personal.
Well, I'm from Durban.
I know, that's what I'm saying, nothing personal. But
and I've asked that question.
I hope that when the management team
but
comes...
not to you.
I hope that when the management team comes, they can enhance your understanding of the economics of airlines and national carriers in particular. But Chairperson, so I think that on that question of
so you're saying
the Mumbai route.
Minister Barbara Hogan's approach was there are processes.
And she didn't single it out. But also, Chairperson, she didn't just focus on one route. I think that Minister Gigaba's motives are questionable, because why is it that, as we say, there was Botswana, there was London, there was a whole lot of routes. And within weeks of his appointment, he starts to try to get us to find common cause with Jet Airways, who explicitly state that their idea is we must get off the route. That's the common cause that Jet Airways identifies. He does nothing to, in fact, support us. And as I say, he actually is clearly talking to these people all the time, and then brings them and presents them in front of us to do that. So Minister Hogan certainly was not obsessing about any one route. She was very focused on all the routes, but she was also focused on a strategy within which she understood and signed off on the notion of being a network carrier.
Thank you very much. Nothing arising?
No, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Carolus, for your evidence. Thank you for having come to assist the Commission. You may or may not be asked later on to come back. We don't know whether in due course there might be persons who might want to apply for leave to cross-examine you, but I have no doubt that you will make yourself available if proper arrangements are made.
Chairperson, I can just say in support of your assumption that I will do whatever it takes to cooperate with the Commission, and I want to circle back to your request after my opening remarks that I wish the Commission well. I do want to make a very strong appeal, and one of the reasons why I felt I wanted to come was because there is a lot of fear that people still have about whether they should come forward. And I must say I was appalled at the vitriol leveled at some of the people who did appear here, such as Minister Gordhan in particular.
Yes.
But perhaps even more frighteningly was the level of vitriol against the Commission itself. And the fact that I do not understand why people who claim to have such serious information are not challenged more seriously and even lawfully to make themselves available, to put these facts here to the case. I'm pleased that Minister Gordhan has actually decided to take legal action, because I do think that there's good reason to be quite fearful of people who incite levels of violence, fairly thinly veiled.
Yeah.
And that is why I really want to say this is a great country of ours. It came at a huge price. We have the most amazing nation of people, but we're poorly led. But for us to be able to build, we need to lance the boil, and I think that the work of this Commission is so crucial. I want my country back. Some people have made a good attempt at stealing our present. They try to distort our future, but I'm not going to allow them they distorted our past. I'm not going to allow them to steal our future. And I think that we're beginning to see some new hope and optimism, but the impact of state capture sits there. I think, for example, a Chairperson, with your indulgence, our President has successfully managed to create some new excitement about the opportunities South Africa offers. Then we hear that Eskom is now running out of power because of the Tegeta contract. where Glencore was effectively shut down and the contract given to Tegeta with no proven track record. And we now were told this morning again, there's going to be load shedding. And so no matter how much support the president drums up, if we can't give people the energy to expand their businesses, we can't grow this economy. And SAA is a microcosm of that. And so to that extent, Chairperson, you have my full support to whatever I can do to help to lance the boil, the sickness of corruption and abuse that has beset our democracy. You have my unconditional support.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and you are excused. Thank you. Mr. Pretorius, you want to say something?
No, Chair, except that the fate of Tuesday is still a matter of cooperation between the legal team and the intended witness. We're not sitting tomorrow, as you know,
yeah.
Nor are we sitting on Monday. And the
And you
reason
say
for that delay has been arrangements with the next witness, Ms. Mentor.
And you say with regard to Tuesday, we probably will be able to issue some media statement on Monday as to what's going to happen?
Yes, Chair, and
Yeah.
the events of Tuesday will largely depend on a discussion we need to have.
Yes. And Wednesday, you don't know yet?
Wednesday and Thursday had been reserved for witnesses or a witness from Eskom. We are told that there is an attempt to secure that, but we can't be 100% sure at this stage. It depends on the level of cooperation, which we believe is forthcoming, but it doesn't result in any certainty at this stage.
Okay, all right. We are going to adjourn. There will be no hearing tomorrow. There was going to be a witness. Was it going to be Miss Mentor tomorrow? Was it going to be Miss Mentor tomorrow?
It was going to be tomorrow,
Yeah.
and then Monday, and now Tuesday, because certain arrangements have been made for Monday,
Yeah.
which really will be spoken about on Tuesday.
Okay, all right. We won't have a sitting tomorrow, and we won't have a sitting on Monday. And as to whether we will have a sitting on Tuesday, we will be able to advise the public by way of a media statement on Monday. We adjourn.